Hello, and welcome to you tuning in once again to your Usha's call. I welcome you. Shalom. Shalom. We're going to have quite an interesting discussion on today. And before we get started in it, I just want you to know this in no way is trying to dictate to you what you feel led in your heart to do. We're going to deal with women's head covering. I've been getting some response regarding that, and some comments, and even some reproofs. And the only reason I am uh, even attempting to speak on this subject, because there are so many other subjects that I can be speaking about, but because I was requested to do so by one of our listeners, and in respect to her uh, and her question and what she wanted me to do was to put on a program dealing with head coverings, I said I would do that. So with that in mind, let's begin. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 through 16, and let's begin reading. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of every woman is man. And the head of Mashiach is Yah. Every man praying or prophesying with anything done over his head dishonors his head. But every woman praying or prophesying with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a woman will not be covered, then let her be shown. But since it is disgraceful for a woman to be shown or shaven, let her be covered. For indeed, a man ought not to cover his head, being the image and glory of Yah. For indeed, a man ought not to cover his head, being the image and glory of Yah. But women, you're the glory, or is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason, the woman should have authority on her head because of the angels. In any case, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman in Yahusha. For as woman is created from man, so man is now born through woman. And all things are of Yah. Judge for yourselves. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to Yah with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it's a disgrace to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. Is it? Is it? It's a question. For her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the assemblies of Yah. I would like to also include in this reading, before we begin discussion, 2 Thessalonians 2:15. Again, Paul writes, "Therefore, brethren, stand fast, hold to the traditions which you have been taught, whether by word or by epistle." Now, on this subject of hair covering, we look to the complete Bible, and we do find that it does mention women's covering in the Old Testament in Genesis 24:65, Numbers 5:18, and Isaiah 47:2. They indicate that some women chose to wear a head covering during the Old Testament time period. However, there is no Testament passage that contains a command from Yah for women to wear wear a head covering. But I also want to interject another thing before we start talking about this, and that's found in Mark 7:13, the words of Yahusha. And this is what he says. Thus to the Pharisees, or the Pharisaic religious spirit that we are really addressing this to right now. Thus you nullify the word of Yah by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like that. Now, in this culture that we're talking about, wearing a veil when one got married, a woman didn't wear a head covering until she was married. When she was married, she wore a head covering. It was a sign she was married. She was taken, all right? And it was a sign, in other words. When we became believers, and I'm talking about back in the early ecclesiastical days, when a woman became married, she would automatically cover her head. But because we were introduced to Yahusha and women were free, feeling freer and more relaxed, again, y'all was saying, y'all was through Saul was telling them, wait a minute now, don't stop the tradition that's been handed to you, because what you're going to end up doing is making a riotous error. And what's going to happen is you're going to be accosted, you're going to be picked on, you're going to draw attention, and it's not going to glorify Yah, and it's not going certainly not going to be anything but shame for you, and you're going to bring that on your head, which is your husband. See, when people get that sense of freedom, they tend to want to do things that they knew they couldn't do before. But he was saying, no, hold to the tradition. Because we're not here to change those things that do not matter in the whole spectrum of eternity. We are here to serve Yahuwah, and we're here not to cause contention. This is what the whole premise of this is. And it's something deeper that he wanted us to see as well, and I'm going to get into that. All right? But I wanted to read something to you because this veil, covering a woman with a veil or a scarf, they're called visual markers, and there are visual markers for the marital status. Visual markers for the marital status, and today in many cultures it's the same. All right, let's look and see though that there are other markers as well, because we have different cultures. Different cultures demand different things. Well, you say we're in the Americas, all right? Well, here in America, for years now, they kind of, it's still kind of a tradition. We wear wedding rings or wedding bands, and this tells you I'm taken. I'm a married woman, so don't come and approach me with anything other than I'm a married woman. See, um, and in many cultures, in the Western culture, in Western cultures, that is what they teach, and that's what we do. It's a tradition. If I take off this ring, it doesn't mean I've sinned. You see, it just means that now they can't tell if I'm taken or not. I always tell my husband, put that ring on your finger. And it also shows I have a covering. My husband is my covering. So don't mess with me, because I got somebody bigger than me, standing over me, watching over me, loving me and caring about me. I'm already taken. All right. In China, let's look at China. The men don't wear wedding bands. Uh, the women do, but not the men. You know why? Because their tradition was that they would have several concubines. So they didn't want to wear a ring because they could still be taken. All right. Some cultures it's earrings. Some cultures, when men marry, they grow a beard to show that they're taken. All right. I'll even go to the Ashkenazi Jewish community. They believe when their wives get married, when they marry, their women wear head coverings. Okay. Some in the Malgastutra, in Hindu wedding ceremonies, they give the woman, when she's married, a pendant to wear, a pendant to wear. And this tells their society she's taken. All right. Uh, in the bangles in Hindu, they wear bangles of red or white on their ankles and on their wrists. Their tradition tells their culture that this woman is married. In our tradition, the Hebrew tradition, we also find in scriptures that this was sometime, not scriptures, I'm sorry, the Jewish tradition, not the Hebrew, the Jewish tradition, that she could not, a woman or wife could not enter the synagogue unless her hair, a wife, her head was covered. Orthodox Jewish communities, women wear head coverings all the time outside of her home, but they sometimes only cover part of their hair. Okay. So, and sometimes it's a hairstyle. Some hairstyles are worn to tell you that you're married, maybe the pull back look. Some, if it's long and down around your ears, you're single. So we have many traditions that deal with cosmetics, clothing, jewelry, and of course, head coverings. And so I wanted you to understand that, because the thing that Paul is trying to say here is he's going back to the creation. And I want to read something also to you by Mark Arey, Arey. We have to understand that a veil is a sign that she is under authority. And it goes on to say that most translators take the word exousia, whose basic meaning is authority, to mean a symbol of authority, a manuscript tradition. Traditionally, to replace the word accusia is the word veil. Ecclesia is the word veil. This probably means that the poor scribe who was copying the text was confused. Now, whether he was confused or not, that's not what we're here to really decide. But I want you to know that by adding the phrase symbol of the word authority, Greek exousia, in verse 10, authority becomes a physical object. A Greek English lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature theorizes that such veils were necessary to guard the women from amorous glances of certain angels. This seems ridiculous at best and disturbing at worst. What is more egregious is the generations of biblical literasts then use this extra word nowhere else in the original text to justify a practice of veiling women. All right. Here's the whole matter of it. What brings honor and what does not bring honor? Does not allowing people to know that you're married bring honor to your husband? No. Does it have to be a veil? No. But it's the way we carry ourselves. Because Paul uses creation, the man and woman position in creation, man being formed first, then woman coming out of man, he is stabilizing authority. Yah created man, and man, out of man, he brought forth woman. It is something that we have to respect, because this is family. This is what Yah has set up, that we might worship him in the proper way. Just because a person wears a wedding ring or a veil on their head, or a ring on their finger, has less importance than the respect given. And what Paul is saying is, if this is a something that's bringing shame to the relationship by you not covering your head, you must cover your head. You see, if a woman is to wear something over her head when she prays or prophesies, what is she? She's always praying, so more than likely she would always have something on her head. But yet single women wouldn't have to. But that's not even the point. The point is, how can we prophesy when we've been told that in one segment of scripture, well, a woman is not to teach or preach to men. She's not to teach them anything. But yet, when we teach or preach, or teach or prophesy, we're to wear our head covered. So something here needs to be really investigated, and you really need to dig a little bit deeper, because if it's not in Torah to cover your head, it's open to you to keep your tradition. You keep your tradition to keep peace. You keep your tradition to honor. But make sure it's just not a veil, because see, a lot of people can wear veils all they want. They don't listen to what their husbands say. They don't respect them. He's telling us how to conduct ourselves, not just about a covering. Some women wear a wig for hair covering and say that that's fine. It doesn't have to be a scarf. You see how we can get into some people wear hats. Some wear little doilies on their heads. But this is not what we should be focused on. It's how you perceive the word and how you react and interact with your spouse. It's respect both ways, but it's also letting people know you belong to someone else. And we shouldn't be ashamed or afraid to show the world I'm married. I've seen women, and when I was in the world, take off their wedding bands to go out and club. I've seen it happen. It's a shame. That's shame. So if I was Paul, I would say, shame on you. You out there wearing no ring because you don't want anyone in the club, a man, to approach you thinking you're married. This was the same situation here. It would be a shame for us to try to show we're not married by removing our sign, just like it would have been back then to take the veil off in public to say that I'm not taken. It's that principle that we're dealing with. A veil doesn't make you any holier than anybody else, doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It's your choice. You can choose to cover your head. You can choose to do that, but I would recommend you also choose to be under authority, because the veil doesn't place you under authority. It's the heart. It's the new work of the Ra'uk HaKodesh that makes you holy, that makes you separate, that makes you yield to what Yahuwah wants out of your life. And to say that if a man cannot get a prayer through if he has a hat on, that's not true. If he pulls something down over him, he can't pray, he can't prophesy. If he had a hat on, you got to take your hat off. Well, see, we get into things then that aren't tradition. We're trying to force something on Yah's people, a weight that they don't need to carry. If we can just keep our own tradition. Traditions are handed down through generations. We have had no such tradition down through the centuries. We were taken away from all of those traditions. We were scattered over the entire earth. We picked up the traditions of wherever we landed. And we better do it. We had to accommodate, because if we didn't, we would be ostracized, and who knows what might otherwise happen to us. Here in this Western culture, we don't have to wear a wedding band if we so don't want to. But it is a good thing to wear one to show you're married. But you're not going to hell if you don't wear a wedding band. No more than you are if you don't wear your head covered. If a person could not prophesy unless their head was covered, that would signal something. But if they can prophesy from the holy Ra'uk HaKodesh, and it's not offending him, it shouldn't offend you. It's best to live this life. It's best to honor and be honored. It's best to yield. It's best to be under authority. It's best. But the thing, the material, does not make it so. It's like that serpent, that brazen serpent that Moses was instructed by Yahuwah to put up in the desert. There were people being bitten by serpents and dying because of their stiff-neckedness. And he put that up there and he said, look and live. But that wasn't enough for the people because after so long, they started worshiping the brazen serpent. They didn't get it, they didn't understand. And I just believe today, if you choose that you want to wear a head covering to honor your husband, that is you and your husband. Because in this land where we're living at, and it could be an honor, it could be an offense. Because the Western culture and head coverings don't usually go hand in hand. Not that everything I do, we're concerned about the Western culture, but I also don't want to offend them either. We have to walk a thin line here. Let's look at some of the people. For one thing, I appeal to the heart. If Yah is leading you to cover your head to show your husband wants you to wear a covering, please, by all means, wear your head covered. It's not going to hurt you. If he says, honey, if you don't want to wear anything over your head, I'm pleased with you the way you are. Don't try to be somebody else. And don't try to listen to another man to tell you something about what your husband's already given you instructions about because you're under his authority, no other man. I appeal to the heart because it's the heart that's really here. He's saying that we have to live this out, not just show it on the outside. I want you to also know that Yahusha had problems with the elders' traditions himself, and I read you that scripture too in Mark 7:13. The last thing I want to talk to you about, there are other traditions in various cultures that we have to look at. Because if we think about it, all of these coverings, just look at the Catholics, for instance, the nuns, and people that go into the chapels to pray. Catholicism says cover your head. Muslim women cover their heads. Buddhists cover their heads. Hindus cover their heads. Satanists cover their heads. Witches cover their heads. The Amish cover their heads. And so on and so forth. What does it mean? Tradition calls also for some common sense. You are not in a place where head covering is viewed as very positive anyway. And we don't want to walk around offending people. If it's something that's not in the Torah, then it's like Paul said, he's going to leave it to you. Leave it to you to judge for yourself. Is this the right way for me? If it is, then you go ahead and wear it. And feel free to wear it and enjoy it. But on the other hand, if you don't sense that the Ra'uk HaKodesh is leading you to wear a head covering, then why would you? And why would you go against your authority who says, I don't want my wife wearing nothing over her head all the time. Why would you go against him? Because the thing is in the heart, you see. So I'm not telling you not to wear head coverings, but I'm not also telling you you must wear them either. Because it's a heart thing. It's a submissive thing between you and your husband. This is no tradition in this culture that we live in to wear a head covering. But if you so wish to show that you are a Hebrew, you go right ahead because that's what you're really doing. And there's some other things we're going to talk about in the program number 2, and we're going to get into this Star of David. People are embossing on their chests and on medallions and pinning on their clothing. We're going to talk about that on broadcast number 2, and I want you to tune into it. So we don't need to argue and fight and bicker. If you're offended because someone doesn't see it the way you do, pray about it. Because you know what? When I see dogmaticness, when I see people want to argue and fuss and fight over something so trivial, it is trivial. It is. Well, Paul said it is not trivial. Well, Paul was living in a different day, and if you cannot consider that, then you really you're not balanced in your thinking. You're not balanced in the spirit. The spirit has no problem speaking to us and telling us what he wants. But when I hear these people that are loud and obnoxious and and throwing out rules and regulations. They have a Pharisaic spirit, that's all. And we have to pray for them because they need to be born of the water and spirit. That's the problem. I really believe most people that are anxious about these kinds of things and just spinning their wheels on trying to correct everybody else. Make sure your wife is submissive. Just make sure that she's happy. Make sure you're doing what's right towards her and that she calls you Lord. You see what I mean? Don't worry about what someone else's wife is doing because that's not our tradition. And if we were back in those days and I was in sitting under Paul and it was the tradition and it was in those days for a married woman to cover her head, I would. But that is not the case today in this culture. And you'll do more to offend than you will to bless. It's more to offense than glory. You understand what I'm saying? When you go to other cultures, I've had cover your head when they want you to. I thank you for listening. I pray that it brings some semblance of peace. It's something you can check in with Yah for yourself. You do that. He'll lead and he'll guide you. There's no shame in him. Until next time, you go with Yah, for he certainly goes with you.